Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Norris-Rogers of RasterMatics. He's the principal consultant of that firm, and he's coming to us from
South Africa.
South Africa. So Mark and I are giggling because we tried to do this recording maybe 2 weeks ago, and I think we were literally 15 minutes in Ottawa, Canada. We had a derecho, apparently that's how you pronounce it, a derecho storm. It knocked down like 300 power poles, like basically a windstorm, and the internet at the office was working perfectly. So I was there, Mark and I were recording, and then suddenly it was one of those, Mark, are you there? And I'm sure on your side, you're like talking for like 10 minutes and then pause it. Wait, is there someone on the other line? So it totally went the wrong way, the way we don't want one of these podcasts to go. But Mark, you're joining us from, I believe, just outside Cape Town. Tell us where you are in the geography of where home base is for you.
Yeah, no, I'm based in the Western Cape. We're part of the city of Cape Town Metro, but I actually live in a town, I suppose you'd call it, called Gordons Bay, which is about 45, 50 k's from the center of Cape Town, southeast of Cape Town.
Very cool. So I've had the privilege to visit South Africa. Mark was gracious to take me around as well. So I do fondly remember that area quite well. Beautiful part of the country, and again, fond memories. Like, it took me around all over the place. Some adventure, which maybe we won't talk about, the rental car and the conveniently placed speed bump in the middle of nowhere. Life flashes before our eyes and after our eyes, because for those who have traveled internationally, sometimes you don't want to get stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing. So Mark's amazing driving skills salvaged that one and kept us safe, and we won't go any further into that. So Mark, you and I are talking right before this. I was joking about whether I was going to turn the fan on or not, and then I kind of looked at you. For those who are viewing, Mark is in a black down jacket, and literally I had to pause because clearly our seasons are misaligned. But Mark, tell me about the weather. Like, what's the temperature like in your neck of the woods? It's 23, 24 Celsius in Ottawa here. What's it like in your world?
It's about between 12 and 15 degrees outside Celsius, and inside it's about 16.
Wow,
we don't have central
16.
heating.
Yes.
But yes, we've just had our first major cold front go through. So we've had some heavy rain, and which we desperately needed. But otherwise it's good. I like the weather down here.
Yeah, no kidding. It's beautiful, beautiful country. So as customary in this podcast, we always like to ask our guests how they got into forestry. So even though I'm introducing you as the principal consultant at RasterMatics, you've been at this for what, like seriously, like 25, 30 years. I know what I mean by what. This is like forestry, boots on the ground. You've seen it, you lived it. You're a GIS practitioner, expert, remote sensing expert. You're bringing LiDAR to South Africa when maybe no South African was really wanting it or seeing the potential. So you were a pioneer on that front. But before we get into that space, maybe or talk more about the journey, maybe start us off. How did you get into forestry, and what was that initial spark?
I grew up in an agricultural environment. My dad was involved in agriculture, so I'm familiar with the sort of being out in the country type of thing. My career guidance officer at school, when we did these things, suggested forestry, and I thought, okay, well, that sounded like a good option, and I went and applied to various forestry companies for posts as a student forester, and I was accepted by a sawlog company in what was then the Eastern Transvaal, Eastern Mpumalanga today, in Sabi, and I joined them, and they put as a student forester, and they put me through forestry college, and I had about 10 years, 8 to 10 years working in the field as a forester. And then I I was fortunate that I was exposed to the whole breadth of forestry in terms of I did silviculture, I did harvesting, I went into forestry research for a while in tree improvement, and then finally I landed up in forest planning as well. So, which is where the GIS and that side of things started fitting into it. And yeah, I think after I'd been probably I was never a very good practical field forester. Forest management wasn't really my forte, because I've always enjoyed the technical aspects of forestry, and that's really been my interest in forestry.
Now, was there
And
anything in your younger days that brought the technical side? Like, were you always a technical person, or it was just something that you kind of grew to discover?
yeah, I think I think one of the things is I've always had a fascination with maps, and I love working with maps and things like that. And I mean, forestry is built around maps in many ways.
Right.
And I think my favorite subject at school was geography.
Okay.
And so I've always had that sort of geographical bent. I remember I was about 5 or 6, and my dad was doing some planning work on a cattle ranch, and he had aerial photographs with stereo aerial with the old diops, and I remember being fascinated with these aerial photographs and things. So I've always been very aware of the view from the top is the best. Um, and as a forester, I was very much aware that there were satellites up ahead overhead, and I thought, they can tell me, I'm sure, a lot of what's going on, much more than I can see from just walking on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I started I was running a plantation at the time, and I sort of started asking questions and asking around, and I was referred to some people in our head office, and they he was actually the chief surveyor of the group and that I worked for, and he took me under his wing and showed me what they were doing as a mining company at that stage. And so I became aware of that. And then I was doing some more advanced forestry studies to sort of catch up and just keep current. So, and as part of that course, I was introduced to GIS in a formal way, and that really sparked my interest. I thought, that is now, I mean, at this stage I was about 45 or something, so I only really found my niche
Yeah. Yeah.
fairly late in my career. But they say today you're going to have about 3 or 4 different careers because of just the way the job changes.
Yeah.
The job market changes. But I mean, when I started, GIS wasn't even an option as a career.
And
And
what year? Remind me again. What year would that have been, time frame wise?
it was in 1977 that I started forestry.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
So
was a while.
GIS even then was really early
Yeah.
back then, like arguably non-existent, right?
Yeah, I speak under correction, but I think it was about that time that Jack Dangermond was just launching
Right.
Esri. So
Yeah, yeah, and Roger Tomlinson on the Canadian side and doing that work. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Now you also went on. You said you
So
did a PhD as well. So obviously, your passion for learning kind of took you down a different way.
yes, I'm not really an academic. I very much like to apply whatever knowledge I have, and but the academic route started more by default. I did a couple of postgrad forestry courses and things after my forestry diploma. And when I learned about GIS, and then I was able to do an honors degree specializing in GIS through the University of Pretoria, and that sort of set me on the road to uh, um, go actually specializing into GIS, because the company then said, "Oh, you've obviously got an interest here. We'll hive you off into the GIS department or the GIS section in the company at the time, which is really where I wanted to go. And I wanted to get into remote sensing, sort of just almost going full circle back to where I started. And at that stage, I mean, one had to purchase Landsat imagery, and a single image was a huge investment and things like that. So the company had a study assisted scheme where you could study and they would pay for the studies and whatever went with it. So if I went to my boss and said, can I spend X amount on imagery just to see if I can do anything with it, he would have probably said no. But I said, well, I want to study, but I need an image. And so that side of the business took over. And so I was able to then, I completed a master's in remote sensing. And then after I completed it, my supervisor, well, before I actually graduated, my supervisor came to me and said, well, just add another year and another chapter and you can go to PhD.
Okay.
So I thought, oh, well, yeah, okay. So
I did that. Right?
Yeah. And it was actually good because I was able to do a lot more. I was starting off originally just with Landsat and things, and then I went on to the high res. In those days, it was quick bird imagery and things like that. So I was able to really get a good handle on that. And all my research was basically around monitoring plantation and forestry operations and sort of developing systems to monitor the operations on the ground from space. So that was really my sort of road into the whole GIS and remote sensing.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. So you mentioned plantation. So for our listeners who may not be as familiar with commercial forestry in South Africa, can you take a moment and describe, like, you were working for Mondi, what, 28, 29 years, or somewhere around there, who's counting? But share with our listeners, what are we growing? What are the main species? What's rotation like? What's South African commercial forestry like?
Yeah, as I said, I started off in a saw log operation, which was basically pine saw logs in the Sabi Graskop area of Mpumalanga province. We were on about a 20 to 25 year rotation. Couple of thinnings, prunings, the standard saw log operation, which was really great because it gave me a very good grounding in forestry. At that stage, Mondi went through quite a big change in terms of its focus, and because it was primarily a pulp and paper company, so the whole move of the company went to focusing onto pulp regimes with eucalyptus. So there the rotations in some areas were as short as 7 to 8 years.
Wow.
In some areas it was a bit longer, around about 10 years. But so and there were no thinnings or prunings or anything like that. You stuck the tree in the ground, looked after it until it had canopied, and then felled it at the rotation age. So it was quite intense forestry. It was short rotation, but very small tree size. You know, we weren't dealing with. When I started in the saw log side, I mean, we were working with trees that were up to and over a cubic meter each. So, but that was after sort of 28, 30 years rotation. But that changed, and the whole move was to much smaller piece size in terms of the milling and things like that. So it was short rotation, rapidly growing crops. Mostly in pulp and paper, or for the pulp and paper market.
Yeah, for sure. Heavily managed, unlike some of our Canadian stuff that I remember when we were in Pietermaritzburg, you took me out to some of the plantations and they were just beautiful, you know, not a lot of understory, you know, just being thinned. It was like, I could do field work here. This is like, you know, a dream compared to the stuff I've been in, the mess, or other words that start with S, as some of us North America are familiar with. So very cool. So I'm really curious lots of avenues I want to go down with, because you have this rich history and experience in forestry in general and technology. As we talked about, some things we take for maybe granted, maybe that's not the right word today. They didn't even exist when you started your career. So I want to delve into that. But to kick things off, maybe it's like, tell me about your journey with LiDAR, because and I might go like, start in the present, go backwards, kind of time warp back and forth. But this is something so for our listeners, you and I met at, I think, an American Society of Photogrammetry, I can never say it, ASPRS, American Society for Photogrammetric and Remote Sensing Conference in San Diego. I still remember it. It wasn't on the main path. It was kind of like this weird resort. There was like white picket fences, and I think I gave a talk, you gave a talk, and then we kind of came to each other and said, "Oh, it's like you're doing LiDAR." And this was what, Mark? This is like 2007.
It was 2010.
2010, yeah. So quite a 21 years ago. Was that 2010? No, 11 years ago. Wow, a long time ago. But you were like, I think, the only dude from South Africa even considering LiDAR. So where did that come from, or did you see something and saw the value as someone looking at technology and thinking forward, or was there some other thing that just got you really excited about LiDAR? Tell me about that.
I'd sort of learned about LiDAR theoretically as part of my studies and things like that. So I hadn't worked with the data or anything like that until I actually we started working with LiDAR in about 2012. I think we got our first LiDAR data set. I could see the potential, and obviously with the research and the reading and stuff that I'd was doing at the time, I could see that there was a lot of applications beyond just the terrain side of things, because one tends to focus on the terrains when one initially works with LiDAR. But I could see the potential on the forest inventory side. But initially we started off because we used to derive contours with the old dot roll system, and that's were the best contours that we could get in a forested landscape, because you can't see the ground all at the time. So our contour maps were reasonable, but they were starting to become problematic as we entered the sort of machine age. And so there was a real focus on getting good terrain data. And I was able to motivate I think we just bought a new property that we didn't have any data for. So I said, well, let's fly with LiDAR and see what we can get out of it. And I mean, the first LiDAR data set that I worked with, it blew me away in terms of the accuracy of and the detail. And there had been a couple of cooperative programs by people before me who were looking at LiDAR, but it didn't really take off. It was, oh yeah, that looks great, but it's too expensive, and it sort of got parked. But I was fortunately, I suppose at the right time, the right place, I was able to start getting LiDAR acquired for the company. And the more and more that people saw it, the benefit, and particularly in terms of getting very good terrain data, and with the focus on mechanical harvesting coming in and at the similar time, there was a big push to get this LiDAR data set acquired for the whole company, which we were able to do over about a 3-year period. Yeah. But I could always see that LiDAR, once you've got LiDAR, yeah, well, you've got LiDAR, you don't need it again, type of thing, if you're only going to look at the terrain. But I could see the potential with forest inventory, and that's really where I wanted to push the LiDAR into, and which is actually when I came across when at the ASPS conference, I went to your talk where you just spoke, and you just had described the whole process of using LiDAR to derive forest inventory. So it was really the right time, the right place. And that's why I went and spoke to you and things like that. And, we were able to build it from there. And we're able to work with you guys and getting a lot done in terms of, I think we eventually flew the whole company with LiDAR and did a sort of several forest inventory exercises.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing when I talk with my my folks and my team, and they go to conferences. Often there's the youngins want to do so much, and I often boil it down to like, did you meet one new person? Did you learn one new thing? And if the answer is yes to either one of those questions, then that was a successful event for you, truthfully. And I think you and I connecting was part of the, hey, we're going to go to this event. We're not sure what's going to happen, but we're networking, right? The power of networking. And it created an amazing, fun relationship and an adventure, truthfully. So thinking, when you initially said, the LiDAR blew you away, I was literally about to say, like, literally blew you away, like your computer blew up because the size of the data, or you didn't have the software. Maybe for our listeners, share some of the challenges, because again, I'm not sure, you're kind of hinting at it, and we'll get into it, but like LiDAR is still expensive, and especially in a South African economy, with Forex or foreign exchange, like everything's that much more expensive. So the fact that you're able to get the company to do a company-wide mapping is, I'm clapping my hands here, like, bravo. But maybe for our listeners, tell us some of the adventures, the pains that you had to go through as you started this program, because I'm sure a lot of folks will, relate to some of the earlier days of trying to get this technology off the ground. So describe some of the software you're using, some of the challenges that you bumped into, and then and maybe connect the dots for us in terms of how does that compare to where the world is today as we think about LiDAR and its application to forestry.
Yeah, I think getting the right software to process the LiDAR. It is big data sets, but that was never really a problem. I think I was just at the right time in terms of the computer technology being able to handle those data sets, and having external hard drives big enough to hold the data sets, and the Esri software that we were using was at a point where it was very easy to create the necessary data sets, the raster data sets from the LAS files that we were getting and things like that. We went through quite a learning curve with the vendors in terms of the specs. I think that was probably the biggest issue for us, was to get the specs right, to make sure that we got good LiDAR data.
Was that because you think you had a need for special specs given the plantation nature of the forestry, or just there weren't any in place?
I think, one of the things that I found a bit strange, particularly with our first LiDAR data set, I think we had about a 30% overlap. So you got a very banded data set where you had a very high intensity of LiDAR, up to 20, 30 points per square meter. And then where you didn't have the overlap, you had it maybe 2 or 3 type thing. So you had a very dispersed, a wide range of LiDAR intensities coming up. And that to me was a problem, because it didn't really give a consistent result across the imagery, that the area that you were flying. So we said, okay, now we've got to have a minimum of a 50% overlap, which greatly improved not only the point density, but we were able to get better penetration into the canopy and things like that, particularly where there was dense canopy. And it gave a much better data set to work with, more consistent data set to work with. We had I was able to be involved with a research project with one of the universities, and so we did a whole exercise in terms of determining optimal point density to basically try and get down to tree counts. How many points per meter did you need to? What was the minimum that you could get away with before you could really start counting trees and things. And that's
And,
always
and what
been the
was the answer,
challenge.
Mark? What was the answer? Come on, people are dying to
Um,
know. This is like the gold nugget.
um, well, I mean, it's different today because the technology's changed so much and the point density is so much higher and things like that. We landed up at about we put out a spec of 6 points per square meter, 6 pulses per square meter as the sort of minimum, and that was good. I mean, we got good results with that, but I mean, today you get 15, 20 points, no problem. So,
Without even trying.
the technology is a whole lot further down the line than it was when I started working with the data. So, that's those. I think one critical thing is in my experience, was to make sure that you got the specs right. And that the vendor knew exactly what he had to produce and what was expected.
Right.
And that was quite a learning curve. That took a couple of iterations of getting that right and things, but we got it right in the end, and we had very good cooperation from our vendors to do that. So yeah, I think that was the one of the biggest learnings for us.
Right. Right.
The also,
what would you say, Mark? Sorry to jump in here, but what would you say the state of LiDAR and forestry is in South Africa now? Would you say it's operational? It's like flown annually, or do you think it's still kind of like it was flown, it's shown its benefits, but from an ROI or business case point of view, it hasn't really maybe punched through that adoption wall?
no, it's to my the best. I mean, I've been out of the direct industry for a couple of years now, so I'm not current with exactly what's happening with the big companies. To my knowledge, no one's doing it regularly. I think there might be one company. The last time I heard, they were doing some LiDAR, but it doesn't seem to yet have really become the norm as it is in places like Scandinavia and Canada and things like that, where they've managed to go through that mindset of, oh, it's too expensive, and they've seen the benefit, and it's also costs have come down to where it's practical and things
Right.
like that. I think, yeah, it doesn't, to my knowledge and understanding, I don't think we've reached that point in the industry here as yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you and I, and I'm sure all our listeners know, at the end of the day in forestry, costs matter, right? And I think in South Africa, there's not as many players that are flying these instruments. So, I think, we back up and look at, supply demand here. There's probably other factors at play, influence in that per hectare or per acre cost. So it's probably, tough from that point of view. Now, just as a kind of a detour here, I know you mentioned you haven't been in the space with the forestry companies, or especially Mondi, where you left back then. Just for educate, because I find this fascinating. I believe you said when folks in South Africa hit 60, they're basically forced to retire or something along those lines, or encouraged.
Yeah,
maybe share, educate our listeners on what happened there.
I think that's very company specific. In my particular case, there was an imperative at the time for people to move on. Sadly for me, but it is the way things are. But yeah, I think it depends on company to company. Some companies, their age is 63, others are 65. So it's not a general rule.
Right.
I think it was more just a function of where I was at the time and the situations that were present at the time when I turned 60.
Yeah, but it's got to be tough being encouraged to retire when maybe you feel like you still got a lot in you left to give, right? So and that's how RasterMatics came to be, right? So so thinking of looking forward, I guess you've worked a LiDAR, you worked with the software, we've heard Esri, so using that technology. I know there's a host of other tools, but I wanted to tap your thoughts on And especially given your rich background, like the EO space or the Earth observation space, I won't say is crazy right now, but compared to, your comment, I'm going to get one Landsat scene versus now where you can task a satellite yourself and queue things up. Like, did that surprise you? Did you think that world was coming, given where you are today, looking back in your career, the early days and your studies and your operational experience? Like, what are your thoughts on the world of Earth observation now? Did you see it coming?
I saw it. The sensors were starting to come in. The high res quick birds, Econos, and those things were starting to come in when I was working with the data. I think the big kicker came in when the USGS opened up their Landsat and made it freely available. I mean, that was an absolute game changer, just in terms of you could just do so much. I mean, I just go now. I mean, I want an image, I just go to the USGS site or to the ESA site, and I can get incredible imagery downloaded for free. And it's been that's been an absolute game changer. And I take my hat off to the US taxpayer, but those were really step changes. I think in terms, and I've heard it quite a lot said by other participants that you've interviewed. To me, there are three things that are driving this. It's the sensors, it's the software, and it's the connectivity. I think those three things are driving and will continue to drive the whole EO space. Sensors, much higher resolution, more bands. I think the next big move that I'm interested to see is in the hyperspectral. For some reason, hyperspectrals always just seem to have remained in the research realm, apart from some geological applications. But I think that's going to take a big move forward in the near future, in the next sort of few years. There are several hyperspectral sensors now being launched, and the German, the DLR, have just launched one, and that's I think that data is going to be free, which will again be a big game changer. I think also radar. I think radar is going to radar has always been the most challenging of the Earth observation technologies to get your mind around and to understand.
Why do you say that, Mark?
It's not intuitive. You can get a satellite image and look at it as a picture and just immediately pick up things. Radar is it's incredible technology, and the big thing is that it sees through cloud and at night and things like that. So you're not restricted to those things that are a huge problem in the optical arena, but you have to be able to translate.
That's what I call it, because Canadians have led on radar. I know a lot of people in the EO space in Canada are like, why hasn't radar taken off? And I always joke, it's like, because you need to know how to do math. It's like all the other stuff, it looks like a picture, but that backscatter coefficient, it's like, if you don't know how to do math, it's like you're not gonna understand that picture, that radar picture, is telling you something else. So it's kind of my joke there when I say math, but sorry to keep going with your thoughts.
No, it is. That is a big challenge. It's not intuitive. You have to understand that even when it's been processed and you look at a radar image, it's not intuitive, and you have to understand what you're looking at, and that takes experience and skill and things like that. So it's a lot more challenging to work with, but and unfortunately in the vegetation realm, it's quite complex to work with in the vegetation realm. You can't just do an NDVI type of process and things like that. So in a built environment, it's a lot easier to work with because there's so much better signal separation. which is not the case in with vegetation.
So
So there's
what
some.
about the spaceborne lidar, Mark? So as we think about, as we're talking about Earth observation, you're up in that space thinking of, dating us, but the Elvis days to the early Ralph Dubaya and then Maryland and some of their the VCL things that had some challenges. But what's your outlook on maybe the space lidar things? Is it really geared still towards more maybe landscape level vegetation studies, or do you see any opportunities for commercial forestry, or not quite yet?
Well, unfortunately, there isn't a sensor. I've looked at the JEDI data. That unfortunately is quite complicated to work with. Well, from what I've tried to look at it, you don't get an LAS file, which is a huge pity, because then you could just simply plug it in and work with it. Look, I think anything spaceborne is going to have the obvious advantage of continual coverage and things like that, and you don't have to send an aircraft up and things like that. Yes, I think I'm hoping. I'm not aware of any specific sensors that are being planned. I mean, I even hear that they're wanting to stop the JEDI program, which will be a pity if they do, because although it just sort of samples data across, you can at least use it as some sort of sample plot measure and to build up from. If there was an appropriate sensor out there, it would be great. Yeah.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. So it'd be curious to see, like with the push of carbon, right, and climate change, right, one would hope that investments into technologies related to supporting those key themes remain a top priority. But maybe as we think about technology, again, Digital Forester podcast, you started when Esri didn't even exist and was launching per se. Is there something that's happened in forestry in terms of technology that you didn't anticipate, or maybe you did anticipate, but it went sideways in a completely different path? Is there one of those showstopper, like, oh, like totally threw me off, game changer in forestry from your point of view?
I think what I find encouraging is I'm involved with one of the local universities here, and what's been a real encouragement to me is to see how much they are wanting to bring in and have included things like remote sensing, lidar, into their curriculum. So there's a strong drive towards that, which is very positive in terms of that the youngsters who are coming out of these institutions are going to be familiar and are going to want to use these technologies. So I think from that perspective, I think there's going to be a much bigger uptake. It's actually amazed me to see the extent to which technology has been applied in forestry, even more on decision support system type things, web-based systems that give foresters access to relevant data. Gone are the days where you had a hard copy map of your in your vehicle of your plantation. Everything's on the tablet and on the digital, and you can drive around and it's real time and you can see exactly where you are. All of that type of technology, which it really goes back to that whole connectivity that I was talking about earlier, where the Internet of Things is really becoming a lot more visible and a lot more practical in terms of real-time information being fed to the guys on the ground. And to me, the biggest strength I always found, or the biggest advantage for using things like remote sensing, I've always said remote sensing is indicative, it's not definitive. and all the time that I worked with imagery on the plantations and things like that, I could see where something was wrong. I didn't know why it was wrong, but I could point the forester into the right direction. And I think the advantage that remote sensing and that type of technology brings is the ability to tell management where to look, to get focused management attention to where it really counts. Driving along a road, you just miss so much. You can't see it. But when you have the view from the top and you can see things and things stand out, if it doesn't look right, go and have a look and see why it doesn't look right. 9 times out of 10, whenever I went and did ground truthing, I mean, one of my favorite examples is I had a very good forester, knew his plantation backwards, but there were 2 pine stands next to each other, and they were mapped as a single compartment on the map. And when I looked at the image, I could see there was something wrong, that there was a distinct difference between half of the compartment and the other half of the compartment. And we went and drove out there. And I mean, this was a guy who, good forester, and knew his plantation. And we went out and there were 2 different pine species. And he said, I have never seen that.
Yeah.
And it was just, to me, it was that really sort of illustrated the fact of how things like remote sensing can direct management attention to where it needs to be, and really bring value that way.
Yeah.
So
so what would you say, Mark, then? And great story, because we've seen enough plantations where where there's more water. Obviously, the trees are behaving differently where areas there's less moisture. You see that in whatever remote sensing product, and how do you take that information and leverage it in decision making. But what would you say? I'm curious. What would you say the current state of the art is in South Africa, what you see? Because when I hear, the universities launching, programs to focus on remote sense, often the universities, the colleges are kind of the anchor for innovation. Like they start because it's that trusted environment where you're in the ivory tower, you could do no wrong, just explore. So if that's getting built now, is there really a strong ecosystem that's established in South Africa for innovation and forest technology? Or would you say maybe it's lagging or just being developed compared to maybe some or other jurisdictions that you see? And even, I guess, thinking of the state of technology and forestry relative within Africa, because South Africa is obviously in the southern tip of Africa, but relative to other parts of Africa, like, are there any trends or collaborations that you're seeing, synergies? Or is it really kind of, yes, we're leading in South Africa, but we still have a ways to go as a function of cost or just learning or basic frameworks? What can you share, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think there is a strong innovation trend. I know the focus has been more on things like mechanization, so machinery in the forests, and extended into, it started off in the harvesting and with lots of harvesting type fellow bunches, cut to length processes and all of that, and that's very well entrenched now in the industry. And there was a strong drive for that over the past few years, and that's moved into the silviculture realm now, where they're starting to look at mechanized plantings and other mechanization aspects of the operations. I think from a remote sensing and side, there's been a lot of uptake in the industry from particularly with the planet imagery, and that both Planet and the Worldview Maxar offerings, they've really become fairly well entrenched in terms of supplying services to the Southern African forestry industry. And I can see, in terms of my work into the East Africa and other places, West Africa recently as well, where it's starting to take a hold. People are starting to see, oh, this imagery can really help us. They're getting past the mindset, oh, it's expensive to get image. Fortunately, the cost barrier is dropping, and you don't need to have a remote sensing expert in your company anymore to be able to leverage this technology. It's being provided as web services and things like that by various companies at affordable rates. So there is a big move on the monitoring side and things like that to start using the technology and the imagery that's available out there. So that's encouraging to see.
For sure, for sure. So when we think about the 1-year view of the world in a year from now, and this question's coming, 3 years from now and 10 years from now, what gets you excited each day, aside from maybe warming up, since as you mentioned, you have no central heating and it's 16 degrees. I feel like I'm back at my parents' house when I was growing up, where we did have central heating, and yet it was still 16 degrees in the house because we were conserving, reducing our costs. So I don't like that. And then I think you've told me single pane glass, like all the things to make your house more warmer, like are not being utilized, but that's a side rant, side discussion we have. But what gets you up? Let maybe start with the 1-year time frame. What gets you up tomorrow morning? You wake up, you hop out of bed. What gets you excited from the technology on the forestry front?
I think to see an expansion in the use of the technology. As I said, particularly with the youngsters coming out of the institutions now, the educational institutions, they're going to be, it's going to be automatic for them. They'll be surprised if they can't get access to this data and things like that. So I think there's going to be, a strong push from the bottom to have access to this technology and to use it. And there's some very clever people out there, and they're doing some very clever things with this technology that I think are going to be pushing the boundaries. So I think with the sensors that are coming on board, what I would really love to see is, I think one of the big issues why hyperspectral has never really taken off is that no one can really say which of the 155 bands are useful for my product or to answer my question. And I think I'd love to see some really good research coming out defining what bands relate well to, say, the internal structure of timber. How much lignin is there? Something like that where they can tweak out those bands and say, right, these are the 4 or 5 bands that you need to answer this question. These are the 4 or 5 bands you need to answer that question. I think when the industry hits at that level of service, then you're going to see a very big uptake in things like the hyperspectral field. But I think that's just a matter of time. I think that will be coming fairly shortly. Also,
it's an interesting point on that, Mark, because I wonder, from the AI point of view, more empirical, they probably are just going to take all that large volume data and shove it through a DL thing and not care. Like it's almost like I feel like the academic side, right? Like what are we remote sensing, the theory, and if we can understand that, then we can build models that are maybe not so heavily tied to empirical data. There's always been that school of thought, but clearly in the last few years with AI, we're seeing it's like, does it really matter? And if we can't answer that, does it really matter because the results are that good, and it's more about
Yeah.
validation and verification.
Mm.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. There's two views, I guess, the academic one versus the, hey, this thing solves the problem. But 3 years out, what gets you excited 3 years out? Again, you still don't have central heating in the house because that's how the world works. But now it's 3 years and you're getting out of bed. What do you think is going to get you excited at that point in time?
That's a curveball question, but um, yeah, I think the I'm very interested to see where the software side of things going, because as you said, as many people have said on this talk, it's sensors, it's software, and it's the connectivity. And I think the software side, as you've pointed out, is the AI field. I think the AI field is going to be the differentiator down the line, and in 3, 4, maybe even not even as long as that, but certainly within 3 or 4 years, I think the AI field has going to be in at a point where it's going to answer a lot more questions than we thought were possible.
Yeah.
Probably answering questions we're not even asking at the moment. So I think from that perspective, I'm going to be very interested to see how that pans out. I've tried to bend my head around this deep learning and machine learning and things, and it is I think it's a bit of a bridge too far for my little brain at this stage of life, but there are a lot of very clever people who are working on these things, and so I think down the line that's going to be the differentiator.
Well, who knows? If you're like the Google engineer, right? We already have a sentient AI under and somewhere in Google's HQ or somewhere that's been in the news, and like you just never know. Even as a lot of us has joked about Web3, you look at the crypto space right now; it's arguably imploding, and what does that mean? But that's we can look at it from a pessimistic point of view, or we can look at it from these are just cycles. There's boom busts, and this is part of bringing new ideas to market. It's never going to go as a straight line. So thinking of yourself as Mark Norris, Dr. Mark Norris-Rogers today, and thinking of young Mark. I always like bringing it full circle, right? Staring at those air photos and stuff like that. If you're able to go back in time and give yourself a pro tip of advice, is there something you'd share with yourself as a young forester, and one younger digital foresters listening to this could maybe draw on and carry with them as they go forward with their careers?
Yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I think one of the things that really has helped me get ahead is that you mustn't be afraid to ask for help. I literally I asked for help to find out about remote sensing, and I was pointed in the right direction. I met the guy, and he went out of his way and opened up the whole thing for me. When I was at another ASPRS conference, I just finished my M, and I was just on the process of starting my PhD portion of it, and the chap organizing my session at the conference where I presented a paper, I said to him, he was the dean of the faculty of bioresource engineering in University of Leuven. But I went to him and I said, would he consider being a co-supervisor with me, because I could see that he could help me. And
our man Paul.
Yes.
Good guy.
Professor Dr. Paul Copper. And he said, yes, that absolutely transformed my whole PhD side of things, just his input for that. When I met you and I came to you and said, can we talk about doing LiDAR? I mean, that was, all of those things were very instrumental, and I was never rebuffed. So I think for me, be willing to ask for help, and people out there will be very willing to help and open the doors. So I think that is for me has been probably one of the biggest things that enabled me to get ahead in the way that I had done.
Good
Um,
advice.
Fortunately, I don't have to say if only I had done that, because
Absolutely.
I was able to do it. But yeah, I mean, I'm in my mid-60s now, and the one thing I see even today, I cannot stop learning. I have to, particularly in a technology field, keep on learning. I mean, I remember when I just finished my last exam at Forestry College and in my diploma of forestry, and I thought, great, I never have to write another exam. I'm a qualified forester. And that was followed by 12 years of postgrad part-time studies. You just cannot afford to stop learning and sit back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think those two things: ask for help, and don't stop learning.
Yeah.
Because those things will carry you.
Well,
Uh,
now we
but
know, as looking back when we were doing exams with the Scantron, right? Just always answer C. Just every question, answer C, and probabilistic wise, you'll come out with a pass anyway. So why study? Just do that. Again, the statistics side. But hey, as we wind down, this is great seeing you for one. We always do these video and we take the video and audio there, so it's great to see you. Awesome catching up. For our listeners, as I said at the start, Mark was always one of the good guys willing to go above and beyond. And as he said, he reached out for help. Feel free to reach out for help. I know I have very fond memories. You took me on safari in Kruger National Park, right? We saw all these crazy animals. Like, where's the elephant? Oh, it's right behind us at the restaurant. So I'm like, holy SHIT, right? Or sorry, $H exclamation mark T. Can't say that word. I'll probably get beeped out. But amazing. You're always one of the good guys. Super fond memories, and I love the fact that you're always wanting to learn. And honestly, if we don't want to be continuous learners in life, I don't know. I would find that a boring life journey. Personally. So for those who want to reach out and tap into, even though you say, in modesty, I've been out of the scene, I'm mid 60s type of thing. There's a brain trust here. For those who want to reach out to chat, for those who want to reach out to maybe collaborate with you in South Africa or whatever that is, what's the best way for folks to reach you? Is it email, social, or what is it?
Yeah, email is probably the best. But I'm on LinkedIn as well. So I'm not a hugely active person on the social media, but I do have a LinkedIn account. So I'm there, or my email is marknr5@gmail.com.
All right, there you go. So everybody, if you want to grab a hold of Mark and chat shop and get his views on the past, present, and where he thinks the world's going, LinkedIn, Dr. Mark Norris-Rogers, or Mark NR as in November Romeo 5 at gmail.com. So hey man, it's great catching up with you. Love exchanging thoughts, going down maybe me more so down memory lane, but definitely cool to see what you're up to and get your thoughts on where technology has come in South Africa and where it could go and where it's going. So definitely appreciate your thoughts. All the best. Looking forward to seeing you in person one of these days at one of those events. But until then,
Certainly.
take care.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you for the privilege of taking part.
Awesome. It was mine. Thanks, Mark. Talk soon.
Cheers.